This really happened to me just a few years ago. It's a hard story to tell, but I've learned that silence is a tax that only the victim pays. The polished mahogany of my late husband's desk felt cold beneath my trembling hands. My son, Richard, slid a sheaf of papers across the surface, the crisp sound echoing the sudden frost in the room where my family had gathered. I looked at the heading, at the bold, sterile font of the law firm's letterhead, and then at the first line, where my own name was printed next to the words petition for conservatorship. It was a document designed to prove I was mentally incompetent, and it was signed by the two people I had brought into this world. My son and my daughter were trying to have me declared insane so they could take everything my husband and I had ever built. They sat across from me, their faces a perfect blend of feigned concern and predatory patience, waiting for me to break. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. Robert had been gone for 6 months. 6 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. I knew because I still counted, a morbid habit I couldn't seem to shake. The silence in our Villanova home was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was a cavernous, echoing thing, filled with the ghosts of 47 years of laughter, arguments, and the quiet comfort of another person's breathing in the night. Robert was the architect of our lives, a brilliant and scrupulous man who had turned a small construction business into a respected real estate development firm. I had been an art history professor at Bryn Mawr College, a life of aesthetics and theory that balanced his world of concrete and steel. Together, we had built a small empire and, more importantly, a family. Or so I thought. "Mom, we're doing this because we love you," Caroline said, her voice soft and cloying, the same tone she'd used as a teenager when she wanted to borrow the car after missing her curfew. She sat beside her older brother, a united front. At 42, she was a professional philanthropist, which meant she chaired committees for charity galas and spent her husband's money with impeccable social grace. Her hair was a perfect blonde helmet, her nails manicured, her sympathy as manufactured as the pearls around her neck. Richard, 45 and perpetually looking for the next big score, nodded grimly. He was a financial advisor, though I knew from Robert that his firm had been struggling for years. He wore his ambition like an ill-fitting suit, expensive, but tight across the shoulders. "Dad managed everything for so long," he said, leaning forward. "It's a huge burden. We saw the bills piling up, the missed payments. We're worried you're not coping." "Missed payments?" I paid our bills the day they arrived, just as Robert had taught me. I balanced the checkbook to the penny every Sunday evening. It was a ritual, a small piece of order in the chaos of grief. "I don't understand," I said, my voice thin. "What missed payments?" "Show me." Richard exchanged the look with Caroline, a quick, almost imperceptible flash of conspiracy. "It's not just that, Mom. You've been forgetful. Confused. Last week, you called me and asked about Dad's doctor's appointment." My blood ran cold. Robert had an appointment the week he died. I had called Richard in a moment of disorienting grief, my mind momentarily slipping back into the terrifying rhythm of that final month, a desperate hope that it had all been a nightmare. Richard had been so kind on the phone, so reassuring. "It's okay, Mom. It's just the stress. We all miss him." Now he was twisting that moment of vulnerability into a weapon. He was using my grief as evidence against me. The document in front of me was thick. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the clinical, legal language. It listed other incidents. Forgetting my neighbor's name, I'd called Susan Sharon by mistake. Misplacing my car keys, they'd been in my other purse. Leaving a pot on the stove, it was on low, simmering a bolognese sauce I'd made 100 times. Each was a tiny, human error, a flicker of distraction common to anyone, let alone a grieving widow. But here, compiled and notarized, they formed a mosaic of supposed senility. Attached were affidavits. One was from my gardener, a young man named Miguel, attesting that I sometimes seemed lost in thought. Another was from Dr. Lennox, a psychologist I had never met, who, based on my children's detailed reports, had concerns about my cognitive decline and emotional lability. They had been building this case for months. While I was weeping in my husband's closet, burying my face in his old tweed jackets to find his scent, they were collecting data points for my destruction. While I was struggling to remember what it felt like to not have a hole ripped through the center of my life, they were consulting with lawyers and doctors, plotting to strip me of my home, my assets, and my autonomy. "We've already found a wonderful place for you," Caroline chirped, sensing an opening. "The Willows. It's more of a community. They have activities. Art classes. You'd be safe there. The Willows." I'd driven past it 100 times. It was a high-end assisted living facility on the main line, a gilded cage where wealthy families stored their inconvenient elderly relatives. My home, the one Robert designed and built with his own hands, the one where I'd raised my children, where every floorboard held a memory, would be sold. The art collection we'd spent a lifetime curating would be liquidated. My husband's legacy, our legacy, would be carved up and consumed by the very children we'd planned to leave it to. I looked at Richard's hands. His fingers were tapping a nervous rhythm on the mahogany. He wore Robert's old watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that my husband had treasured. I'd given it to him after the funeral, hoping it would be a comfort, a connection to the father he'd idolized. Now it looked like a trophy on a conqueror's wrist. "This doctor," I said, my voice regaining a sliver of its professorial command. "Dr. Lennox. When did I meet him?" "You haven't, Mom," Richard said smoothly. "This is just a preliminary assessment based on our observations. The next step is a court-ordered evaluation. But we can avoid all that ugliness if you just agree. Sign the papers. Let us take care of you. It's what Dad would have wanted." That was the line that broke through the shock and pierced me with a rage so pure and cold it felt like swallowing ice. It's what Dad would have wanted. Robert would have sooner set his own house on fire than see me treated this way. He loved me with a fierce, protective passion that had been my anchor for nearly half a century. He knew my mind was as sharp as it had ever been. He knew I was grieving, not demented. I pushed the papers back across the desk. The slide was deliberate, forceful. "Get out," I whispered, the words small but dense with sudden, unyielding weight. Caroline's face fell, her mask of compassion cracking. "Mom, don't be difficult. Get out of my house." This time, the words were louder, each one a stone hurled into the quiet room. Richard stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The pretense was gone, his face hardening into a mask of cruel impatience. "You're making a mistake, Mother. A huge mistake. We're trying to help you, and you're too stubborn or too sick to see it. Fine. We'll do it the hard way." He scooped up the papers, his movements sharp and angry. He looked at me not as a son looks at his mother, but as a predator looks at its cornered prey. "The hearing is in 3 weeks. The judge will see the truth." They left. I listened to the sound of their footsteps receding, the front door opening and closing with a definitive click. I was alone again in the cavernous silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with the chilling certainty that the only people I had left in the world were now my greatest enemies. The grief for my husband was still a raw, open wound, but a new feeling was crystallizing over it, a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was a fragile old woman, lost in sorrow and easily swept aside. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My mind wasn't fading. It was sharpening. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My children, having failed in their initial shock-and-awe tactic, pivoted to a campaign of insidious gaslighting. Calls from concerned friends of the family started trickling in. "Eleanor, darling, Caroline told me you've been having a hard time. Is there anything I can do?" The subtext was clear. "Caroline told me you're losing your mind." My weekly bridge game became an awkward affair, my friends treating me with a delicate, patronizing care, as if I might shatter at any moment. They would finish my sentences or exchange worried glances if I paused to remember a name. Richard and Caroline were poisoning the well, turning my own social circle into a chorus of doubt. They were isolating me, making me feel like I was the only one who didn't see the truth. The financial pressure began almost immediately. A notice arrived from the bank about a missed mortgage payment on a commercial property Robert owned in Manayunk. I called my bank manager, a man I'd known for 20 years, only to be met with a cool, professional distance. He informed me that Richard, who had been added as a signatory to some business accounts years ago to assist his father, had placed a temporary hold on all distributions, pending a family financial review. He was strangling my access to my own money, manufacturing the very crisis, missed bills, that he'd used as a pretext for the conservatorship. I felt like I was drowning in slow motion. Every institution I had trusted, every relationship I had nurtured, was being turned against me. I was a 69-year-old woman who had never had to fight a battle like this. Robert had always been the shield, the strategist. Without him, I felt exposed, vulnerable, and terrifyingly alone. I spent one long, dark night in his study, sitting in his leather chair, the weight of my despair so heavy it felt hard to breathe. I nearly gave in. The thought of a courtroom, of being publicly dissected and declared unfit, was a humiliation I couldn't bear. Maybe it was easier to just sign the papers, retreat to the gilded cage of the willows, and let them have it all. Let them pick the bones of the life Robert and I had built. But as dawn broke, casting long, gray shadows across the room, my eyes fell upon Robert's old roll-top desk in the corner. It was a piece he'd inherited from his own father, a clunky, unstylish thing I'd always wanted to replace. But he'd loved it. It was his private space, the one place he kept locked. He joked that it was where he kept his grand strategy for world domination. After his death, I hadn't had the heart to open it. The key, he'd always told me, was in a place only you would look. A memory surfaced, faint at first, then sharp and clear. Years ago, on our 20th anniversary, we'd been in Florence. I had spent an entire afternoon staring at Donatello's David, explaining its profound significance to him, the way it represented the triumph of cleverness and courage over brute strength. He had listened, fascinated. That night, he gave me a small, bronze replica of the statue. For my giant slayer, he'd said. I went to the mantelpiece in the living room. The small statue stood behind a collection of family photos. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. I turned it over, and there, taped to the felt on the bottom, was a tiny, ornate brass key. My heart hammered against my ribs. I went back to the study, the key cold in my palm, and slid it into the lock of the roll-top desk. It turned with a satisfying click. The desk rolled open to reveal not chaos, but meticulous order. Pigeonholes filled with neatly labeled files. And in the center, a single, thick, leather-bound book. It was a ledger. But not for his business finances. The first page read, the RV ledger, personal and private. RV were his initials, Robert Vance. I opened it. Robert's handwriting, a familiar, strong backhand, filled the pages. It wasn't just numbers. It was a diary of suspicion. He had been tracking Richard for the last 5 years. It started with small discrepancies in the business accounts Richard managed, loans that were never repaid, consulting fees paid to shell companies, expense reports padded with lavish dinners and trips I knew nothing about. Robert had been investigating his own son. October 14th, one entry read. I took another $50,000 from the Chestnut Hill Project account. His explanation was weak, advance on future profits. But the project is already over budget. He's gambling again, I'm sure of it. That trip to Atlantic City wasn't for a client meeting. I checked. The hotel he claimed to stay at has no record of him. Page after page, it detailed a slow, systematic draining of funds. Richard wasn't just a struggling advisor, he was an embezzler. He had been stealing from his own father for years. Robert had documented every transaction, cross-referencing them with bank statements he must have obtained privately. He'd even hired a private investigator. There were printouts of emails between Richard and offshore bankers. There were photographs of him leaving high-stakes poker rooms. The total was staggering, well over $2 million. But it was the last entry, dated 2 days before Robert's fatal heart attack, that made me stop breathing. Spoke with her today. Confronted him. Not with everything, just the initial $50,000. He didn't deny it. He tried to justify it. Said I was hoarding wealth, that I didn't trust him, that he deserved it. The entitlement, it's staggering. But what chilled me was what he said when I told him I was cutting him off. He said, "You and Mom are getting old. You can't keep track of everything forever. Someone needs to protect the estate from bad decisions." He wasn't just talking about money. He was talking about control. He sees Eleanor as an obstacle. I need to protect her. I have an appointment with Paul Ashton at the firm on Friday. Time to change the will. Time to change everything. He never made it to that appointment. He died on Thursday. The grief I felt was suddenly eclipsed by a white-hot fury. Richard hadn't just stolen from us. His greed, his betrayal, had likely put his own father under the immense stress that contributed to his death. And now, he was coming for me, using a playbook he had hinted at to his own father's face. This wasn't a sudden decision born of concern. This was the final, ruthless step in a long-conceived plan to seize control of our entire estate. And Caroline, her signature was on that petition, too. How much did she know? Was she an active participant, or just a foolish, greedy pawn? In that moment, it didn't matter. I closed the ledger. The desk held more files. One was labeled Ashton. Inside was a business card for Paul Ashton, a lawyer I didn't know, from a firm in Center City, Philadelphia, Conrad and Spector. A litigation specialist. Robert hadn't been going to see our family estate lawyer. He had been preparing for war. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the study window. The woman staring back was no longer a grieving, frightened widow. Her eyes were hard. Her jaw was set. They thought I was a relic, a fragile piece of porcelain to be packed away and forgotten. They had mistaken grief for weakness. They had mistaken age for irrelevance. I picked up my phone, my hand perfectly steady, and dialed the number on the card. Mr. Ashton's office, a crisp voice answered. "My name is Eleanor Vance," I said, my voice low and clear. "I believe my late husband, Robert, had an appointment with him. I'd like to take it." Paul Ashton was not what I expected. The firm, Conrad and Spector, occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper overlooking Rittenhouse Square, a place of hushed tones, gleaming marble, and intimidating art. I expected a man in his 60s, a contemporary of Robert's. But the man who stood to greet me was in his late 30s, with a sharp suit, a sharper haircut, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was young, hungry, and radiated an energy that was more shark than stately counselor. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his handshake firm. "I was incredibly sorry to hear about Robert. He was a brilliant man. Please, have a seat. He spoke of you often." I sat in a leather chair that was surprisingly comfortable, placing the heavy ledger on the polished table between us. "Mr. Ashton, my husband was coming to see you the day before he died. Do you know why?" Paul's expression became serious. He leaned forward, his focus entirely on me. He told me he had uncovered significant financial malfeasance within his company, perpetrated by a family member. He said he needed to build a firewall to protect his assets, and more importantly, to protect you, in the event that something happened to him. He was deeply concerned that his son would try to gain control of the estate and would not hesitate to have you declared incapacitated to do so. The confirmation was like a punch to the gut, but also a relief. I wasn't imagining it. Robert had seen it all coming. He was right, I said, and I pushed the ledger across the table. My children served me with a petition for conservatorship 2 days ago. They're taking me to court in less than 3 weeks to have me declared mentally incompetent. For the first time, Paul Ashton looked surprised. He was silent for a moment, his eyes flicking from me to the book. They actually did it, he murmured, more to himself than to me. He opened the ledger, his sharp eyes scanning the pages. He was a fast reader. I watched his expression shift from professional interest to focused intensity, then to a barely concealed outrage. He spent nearly an hour absorbing the contents, occasionally letting out a low whistle or shaking his head in disbelief. When he finally looked up, his demeanor had changed. The professional sympathy was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating focus of a predator. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice quiet but lethal. "This isn't just a defense against a conservatorship petition. This is evidence for a criminal case. Embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. Richard hasn't just been stealing from you. He's committed multiple felonies." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your children have started a war, banking on the idea that you were too frail and heartbroken to fight back. What do you want to do?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, a flicker of the old me, the mother, surfaced. These were my children. Could I really bring the full weight of the law down on them? Could I send my own son to prison? I saw Richard's face as a boy, beaming up at me with a missing front tooth. I saw Caroline in her ballet recital dress, a tiny, determined thing. Then, I saw their faces across Robert's desk. The cold, reptilian patience in their eyes. I heard Richard's voice twisting my grief into a symptom of insanity. I felt the chilling, calculated cruelty of their betrayal. They hadn't seen me as their mother. They had seen me as an obstacle. A piggy bank to be cracked open. My love for the children they were was real, but those children were gone. They had been replaced by these greedy, hollow strangers. "I want to fight," I said, my voice devoid of any tremor. "Robert spent his life building this family and this company. They have spat on his memory. They are trying to erase me. I will not be erased." I looked Paul Ashton directly in the eye. "I don't just want to win in court, Mr. Ashton. I want to annihilate them. I want to take back every single thing they have stolen, and I want to dismantle the entire foundation of lies they've built their lives upon. I want them to know what it feels like to have everything taken away from them by someone they should have been able to trust." A slow, grim smile spread across Paul's face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed his job very much. "Excellent," he said. "Then that's exactly what we'll do. They think they're dragging an old woman into court. We're going to give them a battle against Robert Vance's widow. First, we need more than the ledger. We need a forensic accountant, someone who can turn your husband's notes into irrefutable evidence. I know the best in the city. Second, we need to understand their entire strategy." He explained the plan. We would appear to be mounting a simple, predictable defense. We would get my own psychological evaluation from a renowned geriatric psychiatrist at the University of Pennsylvania, who would confirm my competence. We would let Richard and Caroline, and their smug lawyer, believe they were in control. They would walk into that courtroom feeling arrogant and assured, ready to put a confused old woman on the stand. We would let them build their entire case, let them present all their flimsy evidence. We would not show our hand until the last possible moment. Their case is built on a narrative, Paul explained. The story of a loving son and daughter forced to make a terrible choice to protect their dotty old mother. It's designed to elicit sympathy from the judge. We are going to flip that narrative. We are going to tell a different story. The story of two greedy, predatory children who have been bleeding their parents dry for years, and who, upon their father's death, launched a vile scheme to get rid of their mother and seize the rest of the fortune. By the time we're done, they won't just lose their petition. They will be disgraced. And then, they will be indicted. Leaving his office, walking out into the bright Philadelphia afternoon, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't had since Robert's death. The grief was still there, a heavy cloak around my shoulders, but it was no longer a shroud. It was armor. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was planning. Richard and Caroline thought they held all the cards. They had no idea I was holding my husband's last and greatest gift, a roadmap to their ruin. The hearing was in 2.5 weeks. Let them prepare their lies. I would be preparing the truth. And the truth, I was beginning to realize, could be the most brutal weapon of all. The next 2 weeks were a strange, bifurcated existence. On the surface, I was the picture of a bewildered, grieving widow under siege. I played the part my children had assigned me. When concerned friends called, I sounded tired and confused, allowing my voice to tremble. "I just don't understand why they're doing this," I'd whisper, knowing full well that every word would be reported back to Richard or Caroline. I let them believe their campaign of isolation and gaslighting was working. I let them think they were winning. Beneath the surface, however, a covert war room was operating out of Paul Ashton's office. I met daily with Paul and the forensic accountant he'd hired, a woman named Maria Flores who had the sharp, precise mind of a surgeon and the demeanor of a pit bull. Maria took Robert's ledger and used it as a key to unlock a labyrinth of deceit. With the legal authority of my power of attorney, something Robert had wisely insisted we set up years ago, and which my children were ironically now trying to strip from me, we gained access to years of financial records they thought were buried. Maria worked with a quiet, relentless fury. She spread out a decade's worth of bank statements, credit card bills, and business ledgers across a massive conference table. It was like watching an archaeologist meticulously brushing away layers of dirt to reveal the bones of some terrible creature. She uncovered the shell companies Robert had suspected, tracing payments from the family business to accounts in the Cayman Islands, which then funneled money back to cover Richard's extravagant lifestyle. His car, his country club membership, even the down payment on his house, all of it had been paid for with stolen money. We found the forgeries. Richard had gotten sloppy. He had forged his father's signature on a loan application, using business property as collateral for one of his failing personal investments. Maria sent the document to a handwriting expert, who confirmed it was a moderately skilled but undeniable forgery. The interest rates were predatory. The loan was close to default, which would have put a major business asset at risk. This wasn't just theft, it was sabotage. Caroline's role became clearer, too. She wasn't the mastermind, but she was a willing and well-compensated accomplice. Large, unexplained gifts from Richard coincided with every major transfer he made. Tens of thousands of dollars flowed into her accounts, labeled as familial support. We found emails between them. Richard would write, "Chestnut Hill deal closed. Your special dividend is on its way." And she would reply, "Wonderful. The fundraiser for the art museum thanks you." She was using her father's stolen money to buy her social standing, funding her philanthropic endeavors with the proceeds of her brother's crimes. She was laundering her family's wealth through charity, a hypocrisy so profound it left me breathless. Meanwhile, Paul handled the legal strategy. He filed a simple response to their petition, a flat denial of their claims, offering no hint of our counteroffensive. He scheduled my psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Elias Vance, no relation, ironically, a leading expert from Penn Medicine. The evaluation was long and exhaustive, a 4-hour battery of cognitive tests, memory exercises, and conversation. I was honest with Dr. Vance. I spoke about my grief, my moments of forgetfulness, the crushing weight of losing my husband. I also spoke about my career, my passion for Renaissance art, and my detailed management of my household finances. The report came back 2 days before the hearing. Mrs. Vance is experiencing a normal grief response. Her cognitive functions are not only intact but are in a superior range for her age. She is sharp, lucid, and eminently capable of managing her own affairs. The claims of mental incompetence are, in my professional opinion, entirely without merit. Paul kept the report under wraps. "We'll drop it on them in court," he said, a glint in his eye. "Let them call their paid-for quack first." The day before the hearing, Paul called me. "Eleanor, we have everything. The financial reports are ironclad. The forgery is confirmed. The psychiatric evaluation is a silver bullet. We are going to win. But I have to ask you one last time. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we present this evidence, there is no going back. The DA will open a criminal investigation. Richard will almost certainly face prison time. Caroline will be implicated, facing charges and public humiliation. You will destroy your children. I was in my garden, pruning Robert's roses. The thorns pricked my fingers, but I barely felt it. I thought about his last diary entry. I need to protect her. He had tried to stop this, to protect me from the greed and cruelty of our own children. He had died trying. My fight wasn't just for myself anymore. It was for him. It was to honor his memory by finishing the battle he had started. They are not my children, I said into the phone, my voice as steady as a rock. Not anymore. My children would not have done this. These are strangers who wear their faces. Do not hold back, Paul. Burn it all to the ground. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard him take a deep breath. I understand, he said. I will see you at the courthouse tomorrow morning at 9. Wear something that makes you feel strong. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Robert's study, the ledger open on the desk in front of me. I read his words over and over, feeling his presence, his quiet strength. He had armed me for this final fight. The next day, I would walk into that courtroom not as a victim, but as his chosen executor. My children had prepared for a competency hearing. They had no idea they were about to face a judgment. I chose my outfit with care, a deep navy blue suit, impeccably tailored, with a simple, elegant string of pearls, the first gift Robert ever gave me. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was 69 years old. Her face was lined with grief and age. But her eyes were not the eyes of a weak, confused old woman. They were the eyes of a giant slayer. And she was ready for war. The Delaware County Courthouse in Media was an imposing stone building, designed to make ordinary people feel small and insignificant. It felt appropriate. That was precisely what Richard and Caroline intended for me. They were already there when Paul and I arrived, sitting at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne who looked exactly like you'd expect, silver hair, a smug smile, and a suit that cost more than my first car. Richard gave me a look of pure condescension, a slight shake of his head that said, "You could have avoided all this." Caroline refused to meet my eyes, focusing instead on arranging files on the table with manicured hands. They looked confident, relaxed. They thought this was a formality. The courtroom was sparsely populated. A few of my concerned friends from the bridge club were there, no doubt summoned by Caroline to witness my unraveling. Their faces were a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They were the jury for my social execution. The judge, a woman named Judge Elizabeth Chen, entered. She had a reputation for being sharp, no-nonsense, and having little patience for family squabbles. "This is the matter of the conservatorship of Eleanor Vance," she announced, her voice echoing in the solemn room. "Mr. Thorne, you may begin." Thorne launched into his opening statement with theatrical gravitas. He painted a heartbreaking picture of my decline. He described a brilliant, vibrant woman tragically dimmed by age and grief, now a danger to herself and her own financial well-being. He spoke of my children's anguish, their heavy hearts, and their courageous decision to intervene. It was a masterful performance. I had to give him that. He made their predatory act sound like a holy sacrifice. He called his first witness, Dr. Lennox, the psychologist who had diagnosed me without ever meeting me. He was a smooth, polished professional who spoke in a soothing river of psychobabble about cognitive red flags and emotional dysregulation, all based on the detailed and consistent reports from my children. Paul's cross-examination was short and brutal. "Dr. Lennox, have you ever met Mrs. Vance?" "No," as I stated, my assessment was preliminary. "Have you ever spoken to her on the phone?" "No." "Have you ever administered a single, medically recognized cognitive test to her?" That would be the next step. "So your expert medical opinion, which you are asking this court to use as a basis for stripping a woman of her fundamental rights, is based entirely on hearsay from the two people who stand to financially benefit from her incapacitation?" Thorne objected, but the damage was done. Dr. Lennox sputtered, his professional calm evaporating. He left the stand looking flustered and foolish. Next, Richard took the stand. This was the main event. He settled into the chair, the picture of a dutiful, heartbroken son. Thorne led him through the curated list of my failures, the missed doctor's appointment I'd asked about, the neighbor's name I'd flubbed, the pot on the stove. Richard recounted each incident with a pained expression, occasionally pausing to dab at a dry eye with a handkerchief. He spoke of the missed bill payments, the chaos he discovered in my finances. "We're terrified she's going to lose everything Dad worked for," he concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "We just want to protect her." Then it was Paul's turn. He approached the witness stand slowly, holding a single file. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice dangerously soft. "You've testified that you're concerned about your mother's financial decision-making. Is that correct?" "Yes, absolutely," Richard said, sitting up straighter. "Because you, as a professional financial advisor, have a history of sound judgment and integrity?" "I believe so, yes." Paul opened the file. "Then perhaps you can explain this." He placed a document on the projector. It was a bank statement from a Cayman Islands account. An account in the name of Vance Holdings International, a shell corporation. He then projected a statement from Robert's business account. "Can you explain why, on October 14th, 3 years ago, $50,000 was transferred from your father's company to this offshore account, which you control?" Richard's face went pale. Thorne shot to his feet. "Objection. Relevance?" "Your Honor," Paul said calmly, "Mr. Vance's credibility and his motives for seeking this conservatorship are directly relevant. He has painted himself as a concerned son. I intend to prove he is, in fact, an embezzler who has been systematically stealing from his family for years." Judge Chen leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "Objection overruled. You may proceed, Mr. Ashton." For the next hour, Paul eviscerated him. He projected bank statements, wire transfers, credit card bills. He showed the court the money trail, from Robert's company to Richard's shell accounts, to luxury car payments, to cash withdrawals from casino ATMs in Atlantic City. He brought up the forged loan document. "Mr. Vance, is this your father's signature?" Paul asked, displaying the document. It looks like it," Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "That's odd," Paul said, "because a certified forensic document examiner has submitted a sworn affidavit that it is a forgery." "Your Honor, we've submitted the expert's report as Exhibit B." Richard began to crumble. His answers became evasive, then contradictory, then he just sat there, mute, as Paul laid out the entire, sordid picture of his years-long betrayal. I glanced at Caroline. Her face was a mask of sheer horror. She was staring at her brother as if seeing him for the first time. The friends in the gallery were whispering furiously, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. The narrative had not just been flipped, it had been shattered. Finally, Paul walked back to our table and picked up Robert's ledger. "Your Honor, my final exhibit. This is a private ledger kept by Robert Vance. In his last entry, written 2 days before his death, he documents his discovery of his son's theft and his intention to change his will and protect his wife. He wrote, and I quote, he sees Eleanor as an obstacle. I need to protect her." Paul closed the ledger with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. He looked at Richard, who had shrunk in the witness box, a broken, pathetic man. Mr. Vance sought this conservatorship not to protect his mother, but to silence her. He needed to get control before she discovered what his father already knew, that he had stolen millions, and was on the verge of being disinherited and exposed. Paul turned to the judge. "The petitioners haven't just failed to make their case, Your Honor. They have committed a monstrous fraud upon this court. We ask not only that you dismiss this petition with prejudice, but that you refer this matter, and all the evidence we have presented, to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation." Judge Chen sat motionless for what felt like an eternity, her gaze fixed on Richard, who was now staring at his hands, unable to look at anyone. The smugness had evaporated from Marcus Thorne's face, replaced by the grim realization that he had been lied to and his clients were about to be charged with serious felonies. Caroline was openly weeping, quiet, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice like chipping ice. In my 15 years on this bench, she began, her eyes sweeping over Richard and Caroline, I have seen a great deal of family dysfunction. I have seen greed, and I have seen cruelty. But rarely have I seen them so despicably combined. She addressed their lawyer. Mr. Thorne, I can only assume you were not privy to these facts, or you would have been committing a gross ethical violation by bringing this petition. You would be wise to reconsider your client list going forward. She then turned her full, unadulterated fury on my children. You have come into this court and used your mother's grief as a weapon against her. You have twisted her love and her pain into a fabricated narrative of incompetence to serve your own breathtaking greed. You are a disgrace to your father's memory. She slammed her gavel down, the sound making everyone jump. The petition for conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice. I am referring this entire matter, including Mr. Ashton's submitted evidence and a full transcript of today's hearing, to the district attorney. Bailiffs, please escort Mr. Richard Vance to a holding room. I imagine the DA will want to speak with him before he leaves this building. 2 uniformed officers moved towards the witness box. Richard looked up, his face ashen with terror and disbelief. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. For what? Forgiveness? Mercy? I met his gaze and felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The officers took him by the arms and led him away. Caroline's sobs turned into a choked wail as she watched her brother being taken out of the courtroom. The gallery erupted in a storm of whispers. My so-called friends were staring, their faces agape. Their pity had turned to horrified fascination. They were witnesses not to my downfall, but to the spectacular, public implosion of the Vance family. Paul gathered our papers, his movements calm and deliberate. It's over, Eleanor, he said softly. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. As we walked towards the exit, Caroline intercepted us. Her face was a wreck, mascara running down her cheeks. Mom, she cried, reaching for my arm. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know the extent of it. Richard told me, he said you were wasting money, that you were being taken advantage of by scammers. I thought we were helping. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then into her eyes. The tears were real, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. She was crying for herself, for the life that was now ruined, for the social standing that had just been incinerated. She wasn't sorry for what she did to me, she was sorry she got caught. You knew, I said, my voice cold and even. You knew about the special dividends. You knew the money wasn't clean. You just didn't care where it came from, as long as it kept flowing. You signed the papers, Caroline. You sat across from me at my husband's desk and you tried to have me locked away. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. You will get what you deserve. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight, leaving her weeping in the marble hallway. Paul walked me to my car. The DA will be in touch, he said. You'll have to give a statement. It will be a long road. I know, I said. Thank you, Paul. For everything. Robert hired me to protect you, he said with a small, sad smile. I'm just sorry he wasn't here to see it. Driving home, I felt a profound and unsettling emptiness. There was no triumph, no joy. I had one. I had defended my life, my home, my sanity. I had honored Robert's memory. But I had lost my children. Or rather, I had finally accepted that I had lost them long ago. The battle was over, but the war had left the landscape of my life barren. I spent the evening in Robert's study, the quiet house no longer feeling like a tomb, but simply a space. A neutral ground. The ghosts were gone. I looked at the family photos on the mantelpiece, Richard on his first bicycle, Caroline at her graduation. They were images of a life that no longer existed, of a family that had been a fiction. With slow, deliberate movements, I took each photo down and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of acceptance. The past was a closed book. It was time to write a new one. I didn't know what the next chapter would hold, but I knew one thing for certain: I would be the only one holding the pen. 1 year later, the roses in Robert's garden were in full bloom. I had learned to find a new kind of peace in the silence of the house. It was a silence of my own making, filled not with grief, but with quiet contemplation, with the sound of classical music on the radio and the rustle of pages as I read. I had sold the commercial properties, streamlined the business, and set up a foundation in Robert's name to fund scholarships for young architecture students. His legacy was now one of creation, not of conflict. Richard had taken a plea deal. Embezzlement, fraud, forgery, the evidence was too overwhelming to fight. He was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in a state penitentiary. His house was sold to cover some of the restitution he owed the estate. His wife divorced him. Caroline, in a desperate attempt to save herself, had cooperated fully with the prosecution, testifying against her own brother. She avoided jail time but was sentenced to 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. Not chairing galas, but actual work, in a soup kitchen in Kensington. Her husband, a man whose spine was as flexible as his morals, stood by her, but their social circle had evaporated overnight. They were pariahs, the subjects of whispers at the country club they could no longer afford. They had sold their mansion and moved to a smaller home in a less prestigious suburb. I had no contact with either of them. Their lawyers would occasionally send formal, stilted letters regarding the restitution payments. That was the only connection we had left. The friends from the bridge club had tried to reach out, their calls full of awkward apologies and a desperate desire for gossip. I politely declined their invitations. I was building a new life, a smaller, quieter one, populated by a few trusted friends from my university days and the young students my foundation supported. This morning, a letter had arrived. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was on cheap, lined paper, the kind you buy at a prison commissary. It was from Richard. I had almost thrown it away, but some morbid curiosity made me open it. It was short, only 1 page, filled with a cramped, angry scrawl. It was a torrent of blame. He blamed me, he blamed his father for never thinking he was good enough, he blamed the markets, he blamed his lawyers. There was not a single word of remorse. But it was the last line that stuck with me, that coiled in my mind like a snake. He had written, "Was it worth it? To destroy your own family for money?" I sat on the stone bench in the garden, the letter resting on my lap. The sun was warm on my face, and the scent of the roses was sweet. I looked at the house that Robert had built, the home I had fought for. I thought of the scholarships that would allow young, brilliant minds to build things of their own. I thought of the peace I had finally, painstakingly, carved out for myself. Destroy my family for money? He still didn't get it. He never would. They hadn't just lost the money, they had forgotten it was never about the money at all. The end.